Welcome everyone. Fabulous to have you all here. Congratulations to the to my wonderful cherubs who got here on time today. No easy task in term 4 on a Wednesday afternoon to get yourself along to another video tutorial. It is an important one. And I guess part of me kicking off there is it's a bit sly, a bit cunning, a bit cheeky, is me starting off by thanking and congratulating you, is because that's the key to empathy. It's certainly the key to trust, is thanking people and congratulating them for things that you value, for doing things that you value. And so it's a real key to having people understand what it is that you value and what makes you feel good. So this is a lesson for staff members and for working with students. I know that myself, I ran a little experiment one day when I was, in terms of working with my staff in my school. And the experiment was that I'd sort of been, I reckon I'd got naggy. I reckon I got myself to the point where I was sort of picking on or ticking off people who were late to the staff meeting, because it really bugged me. I just think, come on, you know, professional standards, you know, lift your game. And instead, I flipped it and started thanking and congratulating the people who did get there on time. And I found that it was more effective. Why? Because people want to be thanked. People want to be trusted. You know, people want to be in a high quality working relationship with their principal. And so I realized that some of this stuff around empathy is universally applicable. We're not just talking about students, although we are. We're not just talking about staff, although we are, and we're not just talking about our parents and carers, although we are. And so I've come to believe that this whole notion of teaching empathy, while it throws up a bunch of questions, it actually throws up one really important key as well. And I've come to believe that teaching empathy is the key to unlocking student behaviour. And the reason, well, it's actually the key to unlocking human behaviour, because, and the reason for that is that what happens when you have an empathic person on your hands is they do this weird thing where they think before they act. So what happens is there's kind of a wedge in time where what they do is the impulse to do something arrives. It's often, you know, somebody else has provided that impulse. It could be in a student, it could be a person who's kicked my ball away, sworn at me. In a teacher, it could be that, you know, or in a staff room, it could be that someone ate my lunch, you know, and I have an impulse to behave in a certain way that could be destructive and harmful. And before I act on that impulse, there's a wedge in time in empathic people where they go, oh. They just calm themselves down and they don't do it. And what we're, as growers of young people, need to be interested in is what happens in that wedge. One, how do we get it there? And two, what's going on there? And what's going on there is they start to think about other people. They start to think about people who would be affected by what they did and not just the person who's provided the impulse. How will my colleagues feel about that? Runs through their head at lightning speed. How will my principal feel about that? How will my mum feel about that? If she were to find out, they feel multiple eyes upon them in that wedge. A lot can happen in that half-second moment. But once you've got that wedge and you're able to have those thinking, that predictive ability, it's a high-level thinking ability, is to be able to predict how your behaviour is going to affect other people. Once you've got it, the need for instruction and rules starts to disappear. Because, you know, it's not a matter of knowing that I'm not allowed to kick someone's ball away or eat someone's lunch if they've got their label on it in the staff room. I just have a moment, no matter what the impetus, no matter what the context, where I go, probably not the right thing to do. So it becomes an incredibly powerful thing to have a whole school full of young people who have a wedge, who have a growing wedge between impulse and action in a tiny moment where things start to, where they actually think in that moment. And that's really cool. I mentioned it throws up some questions too. So the most common question that I have to deal with when I'm talking about empathy, and when I tack on this word of teaching empathy, the most common question that comes up is, can we? No, really? Are we able to actually teach empathy? Or are we stuck with the level of empathy that our students come along with and just have to try and work with and around that? And the answer to can we teach empathy, and I've become thoroughly convinced about this, the answer to can we teach empathy is yes, but. Which means that if you teach empathy, yes, you can, by the way, can I just declare that straight up? Yes, we can teach empathy, but you don't get the return you're looking for unless you do two things. And number one is that we need to immerse our kids in a culture that's empathic, which is teaching empathy by stealth. You learn things just by being in context. I know that, if you're an AFL football fan, the AFL Grand Final's on this weekend, my team's playing in it. I know, and I'm not allowed to go, which makes it incredibly sad. I'm not allowed to go, but I know that I will be yelling at the television because I've learned over the years that that's what other people around me have done when we're watching football. We either yell at the players, they can't hear me. They even have less chance of hearing me once I'm watching it through a television. But I've been conditioned into that behaviour because of the other people that have been around me when we're watching football. No matter where it is a bit of a yell. Simple behaviour, not particularly useful. Enjoyable maybe if your team's winning. But I am undoubtedly primed and conditioned into behaving that way. Being primed and conditioned into behaving empathically by being trapped in a culture, in a system where young people just where it's just kind of normal here. This is what we do. When someone is affected in some way or harmed in some way, we tend to fix it. We do stuff about it because we feel for them. We see their pain, we see their difficulty. And so we address it. That's just what we do here. And we want young people to pick up the habits, not by being taught it explicitly, not by being told that it's a rule that you must, but by just seeing it all around them everywhere they go. And then the second piece is about teaching it explicitly. It's about letting them know that we have a technique here that allows them to do something that we can thank and congratulate them for, and then point out to them that that was empathy. That's what we were talking about all along. And so this raises for us a really interesting point. And the point is around capacity. I mentioned it just a moment ago, is we've got to get ourselves past a really important sort of philosophical threshold here around, is it possible to teach empathy? Or are we stuck with this issue of capacity and some kids just have more holes in their bucket than we do, and so therefore they've got less empathy than we do, and we've just got to deal with that. In fact, we can find ourselves sometimes saying, well, because this kid doesn't have much empathy, and we can tell because it's become a habit in their language, well, if you don't do this, then you'll have to stay in at recess. I don't care. Well, I'll have to let your mum know that you're behaving this way. I don't care. So, and I think that there's like I said, a habit of language around demonstrating low levels of care and empathy. But I also think there's a kernel of truth in it too. That, we do have young people whose capacity for empathy is lower than others. So we do have a conundrum around capacity, because do we accept that some kids have less empathy than others, or do we do something about filling holes? So I'm keen on the notion of filling holes, because I do believe that empathy is a capability, therefore teaching it explicitly alone doesn't work. So it's not something that I can impart like knowledge. But if once I tell you a certain fact about something, it's no longer just mine, it's yours as well. You've got it. I can tell you about empathy. I can teach you about empathy. I can get you to make a poster about empathy on a Wednesday afternoon, but it doth not make you empathic. We don't learn empathy formally. We learn it informally, and it can be reinforced through that explicit teaching. But there's an even more explicit way to teach empathy that involves practice and questioning. And so we're going to get to that today. What I'm going to do in the webinar today is get you to the point where I'm going to provide you with 4 key strategies that kind of need to be deployed in a school that's serious about that cultural, that immersion idea of building people within an empathic environment, so they just kind of become that way. And then also how it is that you can choose techniques and strategies that give them the opportunity to do something that's empathic and have you point it out to them. That's explicit. The poster isn't. Unfortunately, they get better at poster making, but not so much at becoming more empathic. In fact, if I were to ask you, when did you become empathic? Now, how did you become empathic? A lot of people say things to me like it was probably I was my family. In fact, if you're in the people that are in attendance today, where do you think you learned to become what influences on your life do you think made you empathic? Could you give me a word or two in the chat box today? Because what I'd like to do is engage you in this topic. If you've got a question, if you've got a thought, if you've got but I don't know about that, then I want you to pop that in the chat box today. So if you would just put in there, even if it's just write it to me. Where do you think you learned to be empathic? Was it school? Was it neighborhood? Was it home? Your family? Was it, in another environment somewhere, in a sporting team or something like that? How did you learn to be able to become empathic? So I can see some answers coming through there. Fabulous. So Michelle says family. Okay, I see that one bob up all the time. And Michelle, I'm often asking, can you remember? A bit like the birds and the bees conversation. We all remember that one, that burned into our soul because there was some information that got delivered to us that was delivered oddly and abruptly and uncomfortably and but no one's what I think is really interesting is that when I ask people how they learned about empathy, if they learned that from their family or from their parents, they can't remember the moment. They can't remember the time or the night or the experience where mum and dad sat them down and gave them the empathy talk and put the empathy PowerPoint on for them. It's just something that became you as you walked your way through and grew within an environment that was empathic. There wasn't an explicitness to it that made us feel, yes, we did the conversation, we ran the mini lesson, we did the awkward talk the way we would with the birds and the bees. But it just became us. I'm often using the metaphor of it's learning to become empathic. It's a little bit like making a fine whiskey. Bear with me on this. What they do when they're making a whiskey is they put the grain on a hard concrete floor, and then they often will warm the floor. So it's got some heating coils through it. They warm the floor, which tricks the grain into thinking it's springtime and it's time to germinate. And then as the grain germinates, what they do is they pump the room full of the flavors that they want the whiskey to, that they want the grain and therefore the whiskey to absorb. So if they wanted to have a smoky flavor, they'll pump the room full of smoke. If they wanted to have a smoky and a peaty flavor, then they'll pump it full of smoke that's been burnt from peat. If they wanted to have a fruity flavor, they'll make sure that peat was built under, that peat was grown and developed in an orchard. So the grain doesn't know that it's been made a certain way, but it's just been in a room that meant that it had no choice. And that's what we're looking for here. So I'm thoroughly determined that our kids can learn to become empathic, but we've got to put them in an environment where they get to practice it. And this puts us in slightly dangerous territory because it means that we're about to welcome an emotion into our school that feels counterintuitive. We're about to welcome shame into our school. We're about to allow our young people to feel bad for doing the wrong thing in an environment that says, yeah, you should feel bad, and we should support you to do something about it. When we talk about this capacity issue, sometimes people say, well, some kids just can't do it. Well, the research is that our influence in schools upon the full social and emotional development of young people runs at about 30%. Now, 30%, if we're responsible for 30% of that, who that kid becomes, then I'm going to be really intentional about that. I reckon 30% is pretty big. And I reckon if we get that right, we put certain kids past certain thresholds in their lives that allow them to become incredibly, much more successful, much more capable. So really important that we seize that opportunity around the 30%. Now, a couple of concepts, and then I'm going to give you the 4, okay? So the first concept that I want to bring to you is just to make sure that we are super clear on what we're talking about when we're talking about empathy. And the 2 words that often get mixed up with empathy, well, one's easy and one's a bit trickier. The one around apathy is really easy. Okay, apathy is young people who are basically devoid of empathy because they tell us all the time that they don't care. Who cares, they'll say. So low level of care, low level of empathy. All right, that's what we're talking about when we say apathy. Then there's this odd, nebulous, hard to understand concept of sympathy that we often confuse with empathy, or that kids definitely confuse with empathy. And sometimes it's because they've been trained to. So sometimes what they do when they do the wrong thing, their parents will do things like say sorry, say sorry, no, now say sorry, or give him a hug, and they're kind of these reflex reactions that allow us, when we've done the wrong thing, to feel like we did something, and to personally, even though I've done the wrongdoing, move on from it. The most common place in society, in a Western society anyway, the most common demonstration of acts of sympathy is when someone passes away. So we have, people who come together, perhaps, in a family home, when a really dear and important family member passes on, and there might even be up to 20 people in your home, and we're all grieving, and the most common act of sympathy that people who are not in the home do is that they send flowers. It's a really common custom in Australia. Some of the estimates are that the florist industry, if we didn't send flowers for funerals or for bereavements or in times of grief, that their business would be decimated by approximately 35 to 40%. It's big. It's a pretty common custom, isn't it, that we send flowers when somebody's passed away. I don't know about you, but in moments of grief, with all of my loved ones around me sharing in that grief with me, I've never actually sat there and gone, "It's awful, I'm really upset, wish I had some flowers, then I'd be all right." And I don't mean to be cruel about it, because the people sending the flowers are not doing anything wrong. They're not doing anything harmful or destructive. They're actually just letting you know that they're thinking about you. But the truth is that the benefit of sending flowers is mostly felt by the sender. It's only Beryl and Uncle Max who just heard the news and went, "Send flowers quickly. We need to let them know we're thinking of them." And when they hang up that phone from Interflora, they go, "I'm so glad." So the benefit comes mainly from the sender, from the giver of sympathy, less so for the person who's in trouble. The truth is, around empathy, that the people who are empathic in times of grief send lasagna, because they know you don't want to have to feed the 20 people in your house that night and go to all that effort, because it's just beyond you at that point. So we have to be careful. Sympathy is about making it about us. We get the benefit. Empathy is about the other. And that's what we want to train our young people to walk towards, is to understand what it's like for another person. That great saying around empathy is about understanding what it's like to be standing in another person's shoes. That's not because, what do they say, walk a mile in their shoes. It's not because then you're a mile away and you've got their shoes. It's because it's about understanding what it's like for them. And when a young person is impacted, for instance, I'm often telling parents this, that when their child comes and tells them that they have been bullied, for instance, at school, I say the worst thing you can do sometimes is to be sympathetic. And they go, "Here's what sympathy looks like. I know exactly what you're going through. This happened to me when I was in school. Those girls, they were just absolutely terrible to me. I'm not, to be honest, it was probably a year of my life that was total torture. It was just, I'm not sure I've even really gotten over it. I just know these are tissues." And we need to ask ourselves, who is that conversation all about? Empathy is saying, "This seems to be having a big impact on you. Can you tell me more about it?" And giving that person the time, the ears, the space to be able to let you know what it's like for them, and not project what it was like for you upon them, not make that assumption. That's an incredibly powerful thing to do. So empathy is about them, sympathy about us. Hear it in your language when you're talking to people. And then the last thing I want to do before I give you the big four is I want to point out that there's a temptation when we're talking about empathy to exclude or to find exception and to say, "Yeah, but not that kid." And one of the most common situations that we find when we're talking about empathy is that when we look to exclude from our processes around building empathy, and we look to find exemptions from our determination that empathy is a possibility for everybody, and in fact is incredibly important, the kids that we tend to exclude tend to be students who have either experienced trauma or are on the autism spectrum. And I think that's no good. I think that's really unfair, actually, to the point where I think it's wrong. And we do it because we underestimate them in terms of their empathy. So we say that they're not, they can't do it with this kid because low empathy. Or I've had some arguments with people in special schools who've said to me, can't do empathy here because our kids are, most of our kids are autistic. They don't do it. They don't do empathy. They don't do empathy. Here's how I see empathy and how I think that we can view it for our students who are on the spectrum or who are trauma affected, is we can say they're not capable of it and not do it. And therefore, the amount of empathy they build stops. They end up stuck with low empathy forever. Now, I want to acknowledge that they do sometimes struggle with it, more holes in their bucket, for instance, than with other people. And what it means is they don't quite get to the brown bit here that you can see on the screen that we call intuitive empathy. Now, intuitive empathy is the kind of empathy that if I'm running a professional learning day and I see, and I might use a swear word or tell a story that's a little bit, in your face just to try and, for dramatic effect. And I might see that there's someone in the audience who didn't like that story or didn't like that swear word. And I'll see their arms fold, I'll see their lips purse. And I have an intuition here that that person has not told me I didn't like that story. So the information didn't come, but my intuition kicked in and said, that person didn't like that. And I'll try to do something about that. I'll either adjust the stories or think about a story going forward and say, I won't tell that one today because I don't want to upset. So I might go and talk to that person about it at recess. I'll do something to try and remedy the situation based on the intuitive empathy that told me there's something up here. For a lot of our kids that are on the spectrum, they never get to that, but they are good with facts. They are good with short lines. What I mean by that is if this, then that. They can know a set of really clear if this, then that rules and possibilities that allow them to navigate social systems successfully, even if it doesn't become intuitive to them. So they can know if I were to swear at my boss, he will likely not like that and sack me. They can know if I swear at my teacher, that person will probably tell my mum, and then I won't be able to have the Wi-Fi tonight. So they can have these simple if this then that allows them to know that if I do this, then that's the way that it will impact other people, and we call that cognitive empathy. So they're just facts, they're just thoughts, they're just lists and menus that we all walk around with, and many of our students who are on the autism spectrum are really good at this. As many people who've taught them will know, they often even obsess over certain facts and become incredibly gifted in certain areas. And if we can give them that language, this little set of if this, then that scenarios, and they often remember them better than we would. Now, my contention to you is that if we do that for them, by exposing them as often as possible to that culture that we're kind of at the moment saying they don't have a lot of capacity in, if we do those things, then what we do is we get them potentially above that green line that you can see on this graph here, which is employability. On the other side of employability is independence. This is incredibly important for these kids. We've got to give them a chance. So if you feel like they won't get to the intuitive empathy, that's okay, because there are other thresholds in life that we can get past just with a handy set of if this, then that's, but we don't get it if we give up on them and we say we're not going to put them in that culture and we're not going to teach it explicitly. That's why you can see those two planes there around immersion in culture and the explicit teaching and questioning that's required to get them there. So let me give you the big four. All right, so the four things that I think are incredibly important if you are looking to build empathy in young people. And the first one you want to do is to bolster their emotional intelligence. And the best way to bolster emotional intelligence is to bolster emotional vocab. So what we want to do is get our young people to the point where they know a bigger set of words that apply to a wider range of emotions and affects than happy, sad, and angry. In fact, when most of our students do the wrong thing, how do you think she would feel about that? The three most common are either happy, sad, or angry, as though they're the only things that we're capable of feeling, which is, as we all know, completely untrue. In fact, each of those words and feelings and affects themselves are usually a range. So even if we look at that range around anger, one of the things that we often find is that there are a series of words that could mean angry. in various degrees and intensities. So you can feel frustrated, you can feel annoyed, you can feel irritated, you can even feel miffed as being a lower form of anger. And so one of the ways that we can do that with some of our students, particularly our younger students, but I've even had these sometimes in secondary classes, a little bit of a fast finishes activity. So instead of giving them a word search or something like that to finish, or free time, I'll throw one of these at them. And with a partner, what I want you to do is to label what the person on the screen is feeling, in that box is feeling. Oh yeah, no worries. And they go to happy, sad, angry on the first three. No. Oh yeah, by the way, you can only use the same word once. Can't use it twice. Oh. And then I've watched vehement arguments between year 1 and between year 10 students about whether they should use the word happy on that picture and joy on this picture. No, he's more joy in this one, and this is building high level emotional intelligence. This is being able to discriminate between two faces. This is allowing them to practice that intuitive empathy that we would like them to get up to at some point. But they don't do it if they've only got happy, sad, and angry to refer to. So a great little activity that's just easy to, you can go and look up these pictures on the internet. You can write affect faces or feelings faces. You'll get heaps of them. Keep a few of them up your sleeve in your classroom, and just squeeze it in when you get the opportunity. When somebody's annoying you and being bored, then okay, you do this for me. What? And get that done. And it bolsters emotional intelligence by bolstering their emotional vocab. Now, the next way that I want you to bolster emotional vocab is through your speech. In the restorative model, we call this affective language. So affective, not effective, which means pretty much just saying whatever you were going to say, but chuck in a feelings word. They can be positive, they can be negative. But what we're trying to do is to, as often as possible, let a young person know that what you did then had an impact on me, on others. So letting someone know that I'm really impressed with the way that you didn't push in line there and just allowed others to stand at the front of the line. I think that's really responsible. Well done. To let someone know that I'm really disappointed with the way that you did push in line there, because you knew that somebody was ahead of you, but you decided that you were going to take their spot anyway. And sometimes I love to even put that in there, and I don't tell them that you need to go to the back of the line. I'll just let that disappointment stand and see what they do. And when they do put themselves at the back of the line, I actually can thank them and congratulate them for making that choice themselves, because they didn't do it as an instruction. What they did was they acted upon their wedge. So instead of impulse to jump in line and took it, we actually then took a moment and we said, no, through my language, I'm going to say I'm disappointed with your choice to stand at the front of the line, given that Sarah was clearly in front of the line in front of you. And just give them that moment, because there's thinking going on in that moment. And this is a really important piece. Thinking that's going on in that moment is the wedge. And we need to give them practice at experiencing the wedge between impulse and action. And what's going on in their head is, oh, he's really disappointed. Oh, he hasn't told me to do anything. Oh, what does he want me to do? Oh, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to line up behind Sarah, aren't I? All right, I'll make that choice for myself. So instead of you creating a situation where you've provided the instruction, you have to go and stand behind Sarah. Yeah, exactly, right there. Don't do that next time. We've created a moment they've gone and stood behind Sarah, and you're able to say, really pleased that you did that. Effective language again, doubling down on that. Really pleased that you did that, because it shows that you understand what that would have been like for Sarah. Now we're teaching empathy. And you can get dozens of opportunities like that in a day to speak differently to your students by putting positive and negative affective language into your work. It doesn't cost you more time. It's just a new habit that you're trying to create. And if you can do that, you can do some pretty cool stuff. Now, the second thing I want you to do is to, I've ummed and ahed about this heading and the way that I should talk about it. I love the notion of getting Socratic, but really what I'm talking about here is approaching a young person when they do the wrong thing with curiosity rather than accusation. So what that thinking, what that framing allows me to do is to get Socratic, which means I'm in the business of generating thought through questioning. So Socrates said, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. So you can't teach a kid empathy, but you can put them in circumstances where they have to think, and they have to think in a certain way. And so when a young person does the wrong thing in my care, I'm big on actually walking over to them and saying, what was that all about? What was going on there? And so I try to get a healthy balance in my language about the way that I work, about the way that I'm working with young people, that says that I'm trying to get to about a 75% question rate. So I'm asking myself, if I'm going to reflect on how well I handled that situation, what I'm going to do is ask myself, how many questions did I ask compared to statements that I made? And if I think that there's about a 3-to-1 ratio, about a 75% question, 25% statement, then I reckon I'm handling that situation the way Socrates would have. So it's a very fundamental shift in the way that we, as teachers, need to operate. As teachers, we're tellers. We're lovers of our own voice. And we often miss the opportunity to have young people think because we didn't ask any questions. Myself, I'm often telling the story of the day that I arrived with a particularly challenging group of students at interschool sport, and whole busload of them, and their behaviour was an incredibly challenging cohort. And as we arrived, myself and another teacher who used to take this group of students out, we used to call it the spiel. So someone had to spiel the kids before they got off the bus. We had to prime them for what we expected of them when they went inside. And I looked at my colleague Marty, and he looked at me and he said, whose spiel is it? I said, I think it's my turn. He goes, go for it. And so I stood up and said, right, you lot, listen up. Eyes here, all of you. What I need from you today, every single person as they leave this bus takes their drink bottle with them, because I will not have people going to the bubblers the way we did last week and putting sticks in those things and breaking them. We got phone calls from the stadium about how they weren't going to let us back in, and I've spent an hour this week trying to convince them that they should let you back in. I'm also not having people wandering across the street trying to get drinks from McDonald's. You've got a drink in your hand, you were made to bring it. I expect you to take that with you into the stadium. We also do not swear at the referees. These people have been giving their time, and they do not deserve to be abused by the likes of you when they get in there. If you want to go to the toilet when you get in there, you come and see Marty or me, and you ask permission, and you will be going with a partner, because there was graffiti in those toilets last week, and some of those tags look incredibly familiar to me that are in there. Okay, and I went on, and I had about 6-7 behaviours that I expected of all of these kids. And I think there was a part of me that realised that most of them were sitting there going, kind of enduring my speech, sure, but are they thinking? No. And without thinking, there's no wedge. And so what happened when they got off the bus? About 75% got off without their drink bottle. The behavioural improvement comes from actually thinking about it. And if I actually said to them, right, you lot, I want you to turn to the person next to you and talk to them about the 4 things that are in my head. What do you think is in my head that I'm looking for from you today? They would have talked about some of those behaviours, because to answer the question they would have needed to. And I would have increased my chances of them actually doing the right thing as they got off the bus, perhaps in the stadium, who knows. But I'm into this notion of increasing my chances. As a teacher, when I ask more questions and say less stuff, deliver less sermons, so tempting because I'm really good at them. But when I resist that temptation and ask more questions, I get a better response from the young people that I'm working with. Now, the third strategy links to the second strategy, which while I'm asking questions, I'm often thinking about people often ask, what sort of questions? What do I ask? And really all you need to do is ask questions that as quickly as possible. So I'm looking for the smallest possible volume, smallest possible number of questions you can possibly ask that gets a young person from the past to the present to the future. But what that allows us to do is to kind of explore quickly and roughly what happened. How much time should you spend on the past? Well, no more than you're spending on the present or the future. And I'm a firm believer that too many of our kids become what we might refer to as bush lawyers, because we put a situation around them where they had to. We made the only possible outcome of the way that we're going to work when they fail is a negative outcome upon themselves. So what do you do when you think you're going to get a negative outcome? Well, you argue that you shouldn't get a negative outcome, and you lie, and you minimize, and you omit, and you deflect, and you blame other people. And that's not okay. That's not what we want for our young people. That's not the habit that we want them to build. So we don't want to talk about the past forever so that they can paint it in their own preferred color. What we want to do is get a gist of what happened, move on to the present, which is what kind of is the damage here in terms of people, and then on to the future, which is what are you going to do about that? What's the action that you're going to take that will have us genuinely hand on heart say, that actually fixed the present, that actually fixed the thing that I'm most worried about. That's the harm, that's the damage here in terms of people. You can explore a little further with, some people use the restorative question cards, and I've got a set that I hand out to schools all the time, and there are extra questions on there. There's not 3, there's 5 or 6 on each side, and you can ask those for clarification and to get a better idea of what's really happening in that situation, or how this really might be making people feel, or really is saying sorry or giving someone a hug. Is that really the best you can do? Does that really fix the harm? You can ask more questions if you need to, but if you're out of time, just go fast. What was that all about? How do you reckon that made me feel? What are you going to do about that? You can do that quite quickly. So Socratic, lots of questions, all right? And what's the purpose? What's the function of the questions? The function of the questions is to go past, present, future as nimbly as you possibly can with the time that you have available to you. And then the last thing that I want you to do goes to kind of that black rock. So this whole idea of what's the future, what's the action that we want people to take. And I'm often referring to apologies of action. The reason for the picture is that in my time as a principal, when I was in the Northern Territory, different climate in the Northern Territory, it's hot, and we used to call them sweaty apologies. So you had to actually do something. It wasn't okay to say sorry, particularly if it's a sorry. Most people will accept a sincere apology. Some will want more than that, and that's fair enough. And some people just, will flat out, just a sorry doesn't fix it. I actually don't even want that. I want you to do something else. So we used to call them sweaty apologies, that you actually had to break a sweat. You had to go to some effort. It had to cost you some time, because that was more likely to repair the harm that you've caused. Another school that I work with here in Victoria had a year 3-4 class who really worked hard on this whole delivering a good apology. And around term 3, they came up with, they had a conversation as a class in a circle, highly restorative school. And they said that the students came up with a decision for the class. And I asked the teacher, what do you mean? And she said, they came up with a rule that the word sorry is banned. And I went, okay, well, this will be good. How do you do restorative practices without sorry? And she said, we call it a shorry. And I said, a shorry? And she said, yep, you have to show you're sorry in our class. I went, right. And she said, we have a shorry board. And she showed me a board that they have on the wall where the students had brainstormed 15 different ways that you can shorry. So if 2 people are in conflict, if there's been harm caused in a relationship or in a group, or even as a class, they can go over to the shorry board, look at the board, and if they can't come up with something themselves, they can choose something off the shorry board that would do it. So somebody who's done the wrong thing says, would you like me to do number 7? I go, oh, probably rather number 12. All right, okay, I'll do that. And so there's an action that, for the teacher, provides a circumstance in which they can thank and congratulate the student or students for carrying that out together. And the things tend to be not fake apologies, which is really awesome. I looked on the board and I saw number 14, the second last one on the list. I looked at the teacher and I said, really? And she said, really? And it's happened twice. Number 14 was, we have to go home and play Fortnite together that night on the computer online. So they would connect online and play Fortnite together. And as I just said, I'm not 100% convinced that it's an incredibly positive thing. She said, because they come in the next day and they're both bragging together about how many people they killed together the night before, which seems a little bit, but she said the truth is that both times it's happened, the two students who've been in conflict and in relational dysfunction when they left at the end of the day have come in the next day with a repaired, restored relationship. That's pretty cool. So if you can encourage apologies that take some effort, you get to, because you get to do that thanking and congratulating, the students get a reward for doing that. It's very hard to thank someone for going sorry. So I'm pretty good at it. You can create an environment where they start to want to do the things that get them thanked and congratulated, which is go to some effort, deliver a sweaty apology. And I think if you can get those things going, you have built an environment, so a culture where young people are more likely to become smoky grains. And then I think on the other side of it, you have some explicit practices that teaches them exactly what it means to be empathic. I've written about this at great length in a book that's out there at the moment called Restoring Teaching. I've had a pretty phenomenal response to this. I'm sort of proud and a little bit embarrassed about the response that we've had to this. And the link that you can see there in the chat box gives you an opportunity to go and buy that if you would like to get your hands on Restoring Teaching. A couple of things you can also do is, if you're interested in our Real Schools Academy, the next intake actually begins next week. So if you're teaching, for instance, new to profession teachers, one of the elements of one of the graduate faculty courses is about how you teach empathy. So make sure that you have a look at that. These are 6-week courses that you can get people into, and the content is just amazing. So feel free to seize the opportunity that still exists between now and the end of this week to get some people in your school into those courses. And then the third thing I want to point out to you is these are the kinds of resources that we provide to our member schools. And to become a member school costs you only $249. That gives you a login that you can get access to the full archive of all the resources we build, all the articles for teachers, articles for leaders, videos, webinars like this are all sitting there ready for you to play at a staff meeting or in a PLC meeting if that would help. White papers, ebooks, fact sheets, all sorts of resources around building a stronger school culture available there, and your whole school gets full membership and full access for just $249. So I realised I hadn't mentioned that much lately, and it's something that I really would love your school to have access to as well. I think that you can get the kind of help that you got today in across a much bigger array of issues and challenges that we know we face in schools. And there endeth the lesson, and there endeth the final webinar, final video tutorial that we're going to run this year. I really hope you've enjoyed them. I really hope you've gotten a lot out of these video tutorials. They've been a lot of fun to deliver. I've been gobsmacked by the amount of people that have come along and been a part of them. And I hope that they can be an ongoing resource to you. So the people who are here in the attendee list today, thank you so much again for coming along. You'll get a recording of this one as well, so you can use that for your own personal reference as well. If you're watching this as a recording, I hope this can be a really useful resource to you as well. And I hope you remember also that there's stacks of ways that we can keep helping you. So get in touch with us through that email address that you can see on the screen there, info@realschools.com.au. Have a shameless snoop around our website and all of the different ways that we can work with you, or give us a call and we'll find a way to have a chat. I'll leave it there, I think. Have a great evening, and I'll see you all again soon. Okay, bye for now.